Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition here to give you our quick update and recap on last night's bargaining session between the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers and Minneapolis Public Schools. Heather, how are you doing?
Good. Got to get a sweatshirt on today. It's chilly.
Yeah, we got that fall chill coming in. It's a gloomy, rainy Friday, but we learned last night that this was our 10th bargaining session already of this negotiation cycle. So we are in it, and we haven't made a lot of progress at this point for having 10 bargaining sessions. So, Heather, do you want to go ahead and talk about what went down last night?
Yeah, so last night the district countered MFT's COVID proposal with some changes. Now, we did learn last night that they've been having what both sides consider some really successful sidebars where they've been getting closer on a few things. But the real bulk of the conversation last night had to do with this issue of around pay for prep time. So, if a teacher has to sub during their prep time, they were talking about what that pay would be versus what they felt like it should be. And that seems really valid because I bet we're going to have a lot of teachers subbing during their prep times. They also heard a conversation about what would happen for sick pay if, let's say I'm a teacher and my child has to quarantine. Do I have to use my personal sick days for that, or could we get some extra sick days in order to cover some of that extra sick time that we would need? That one feels like it's pretty close. I think they're a couple of days apart, but they feel like they're getting closer with that one. And then the final part of that big counter package was really about class size. The union really wants to see class sizes get smaller because they really name and felt like that would help with COVID spread and mitigation and contact tracing and all of that. What we heard last night from the district was really like they would love to do that too, but it
Mhm.
doesn't sound like they can move on that because it doesn't seem possible. Like we would have to move kids out of buildings, and we don't have enough staff to cover that if we go to a smaller class size. We don't have capacity. There's just not a way to be able to make that happen. And then our buildings physically don't allow us to do that. We don't have enough rooms. So those were kind of the three big conversations that happened. Sounds like we're getting closer on some, and we heard a definite no on one.
Right. So I think that leads me to my first takeaway, which was, actually at the beginning of this bargaining session last night, they were not that close on especially these three issues. And if you were just following along on even with the bargaining sessions that we've watched, you would think like we keep coming back to these issues over and over and over again, and it feels like no side is moved. But it sounds like Heather said, it sounds like they've had some really successful sidebars that have taken place. And while these three issues may not have been moving, there have been other issues that it sounds like that the district has made movement on, has like tried to compromise around. And I think last night, what was really interesting and what kind of turned the page on the negotiation was the district, specifically Executive Director Bennett, Kendra Bennett, coming out and saying like, look, we are really frustrated about this. We are moving. We are trying to meet y'all where you're at. We have a proposal that is increasing the amount of prep time or subbing during prep time. We have made movement on trying to figure out how we can provide staff with more sick time during this period. But like, it doesn't feel like you all are willing to even acknowledge that we've moved. You aren't moving with us. You all are staying at the same spot. And the second that that started to take place, and I thought the term regressive bargaining was an interesting one. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds like a thing that you don't want to be accused of partaking in, especially in a public forum. That all of a sudden turned to the union going back and caucusing and saying, here are some ideas on things that we are willing to move on with you. So it was really interesting because I thought the district tried to really own their own story and own like what they are trying to do, as opposed to just being accused of not, providing what's best for teachers, what's best for students. And they really said like, no, we are moving and we need MFT to move with us. And I thought that was the turning point in the conversation last night to help us get to a closer place. So now, even though the district is at $30 for a teacher per hour for a teacher to sub during their prep time. The union was at 50 and they came down to 40. And so that's where you're like, oh, okay, they're starting to make headway. Or, they were talking about the amount of sick time. They asked for, it looked like before the union was kind of asking for unlimited sick time for every, like, it was like 14 days or 10 days for every incident that someone needed a quarantine. And the district was like, we can't do that. But it sounds like the union was like, okay, how about you pay for half of our 14 days and then we'll pay for the other half. So that would effectively double the amount of sick time that a teacher can have for the entirety of the school year. So I thought, like Heather said, I thought the turning point there was really trying to figure out, like, the district coming out and saying, like, you're not going to publicly just talk about us without us saying, like, the things that we have also done to try to meet you, to solve some of these concerns that we all share.
Yeah, I think my takeaway kind of like builds on that a little bit, in which one of the things that concerned me last night was, you know, like there's some of the narrative that was being said, like, families are scared. We're hearing from families every day, and we already have one school closed down. And I really appreciated Associate Superintendent Rochelle Cox, who we know is still managing all of, like, when there's a COVID case or when there's something happen, that is all still going through her. And she was really clear to name, like, we are doing the very best that we can do in these situations. And I want to be clear that that everything is not happening from fear, that we're using good information, that in many ways we are going above and beyond what the health department is asking us to do. And so just really kind of grounding us in the story. I think, it's so easy to right now have a lot of fear about Delta, and especially for people who have kiddos too young to vaccinate. And so I appreciated, like, kind of that pull back from the storylines. And I think some of the stories are challenging to, like, here is what we are doing. And we are doing, we are really trying our best to do due diligence with a really tough situation.
Yeah, it seemed like the district was really concerned about the narrative that we were sharing with the community around, just as a given that, oh, Minneapolis public schools are dangerous when it comes to COVID, and our families are, bringing this in, or, our teachers are in danger, or our students are in danger, or whatever it may be. And I thought, actually, to that point, Senior Officer Sullivan's point around, like, look, yes, we have 5 schools on this list of, places that need a quarantine or whatever it may be, and other districts may not. But we have more buildings in our district than any other. So it's not like, because the union was trying to use that as a point of, like, yeah, it's so out of control in Minneapolis as opposed to other places. And it's like, no, we just have more buildings than other places have. And so, yeah, we're going to have more buildings on this list. And I think that was also just really telling. And I think that, again, the district is really working on trying to say, like, we're not going to let these, like, high profile incidences drive the decision making, because, like, if we're going to start telling this narrative and have implicitly saying, like, our students are dangerous, our schools are dangerous, like, we're going to start them making bad decisions based on, like, bad narratives. And I
Mm.
think it was really, really important that the district tried to really rein that in and say, like, look, we need to have good data, we need to have good information, and we need to be really logical about, how we're going to start making decisions on who's safe, what is safety, and, like, how we're going to, like, mitigate as much risk as possible while also providing instructional support for our students.
Yeah, and
Right.
speaking of safety, there's been this kind of longer moving conversation about, students of color needing teachers that look like them, and that's what helps them feel the most safe. And what I appreciated last night was Senior Officer Moore saying, hey, we know that the imminent is here. We know that COVID is happening. But 2 different times in the meeting last night, he said, but we need to get back to this teacher of color MOA, because this is also a part of students needing to feel safe in our buildings. Um, and so when that happened, when that conversation came forward, it was interesting. There was some, that conversation brought up some interesting points as well.
Yeah, and over the last 4 bargaining sessions, there's been no conversation around teachers of color when it seemed like both sides were kind of close around figuring out protections for teachers of color. And then, yeah, Delta became a much bigger reality for us over the course of the summer. And then when the August negotiation or bargaining session started taking place through now the end of September, they've all been focused on Delta. They've all continually been focused on Delta, and it's just really challenging again because what was shared last night as a response to it. One, I thought that Union President Callahan came off kind of dismissive and defensive in that situation, and in saying in being in that way, also tried to put the district and specifically senior officer Moore in a place of saying like, oh, you're using white supremacy tactics or white supremacy culture to say this is an either or conversation while teachers of color are still clearly on the table. Well, when I've talked to a lot of families, when I've talked to teachers of color, they feel like that they've just been forgotten about in this conversation. And so I'd actually really challenge Union President Callahan to talk to her members of color and say like, we you are not on the back burner. And yeah, can we do 2 things at once? Can we talk about 2 different items at once? Um, because yeah, I think it's really challenging, and I think all of us during our watch party had a collective gasp when we were like, "Whoa! Did again this white woman tell this black man that you are using white supremacy tactics?" I don't actually know what is a white supremacy tactic more than that, actually, but that's my perspective on that because I promise, like Heather, if you ever said that to me, we would have a very serious conversation about how I'd feel in that situation. So anyway, I just thought that was a really frustrating response to trying to recenter this conversation on what we know is a city priority, a community priority, and a priority for both sides. And a simple question to just ask: can we bring this back to the table as well? Can we make sure that this is addressed? I just thought that came off really poorly. And to your point around student safety, yeah, COVID is definitely a thing around student staff safety, their physical safety. And like you said, providing teachers of color is also around like students' mental health and their safety. But I'd also say like their physical safety, like especially knowing how many students are coming back to classrooms for the first time this year and how rough this beginning of the school year has been for lots of different reasons and lots of different people. you know, I actually do see a world where like students' physical safety is in danger the more and more we don't have, you know, adults in the building that look like them and reflect their identity and understand what they've gone through over the course of the last 18 months. And while the teacher of color MOA isn't going to put more teachers of color in the classroom tomorrow, at least our staff of color will know that their contributions are valued and that they will have a place in our buildings, in our district for the foreseeable future. So I think this is actually also an issue of physical safety. It just it may be a different reality than, you know, what a lot of our white teachers actually understand and experience in Minneapolis public schools. And what a lot of our white students and parents also really understand in Minneapolis public schools. So
Yeah, and I think it was one just quick example of that was when we were having there was a kind of this conversation that happened around learning loss, right? And one of the teachers said, you know, my daughter didn't experience learning loss because she learned to do laundry during distance learning. And like I do think that there was an opportunity during distance learning to have many different experiences, but when I talk to children, as a matter of fact, I talked to an oldest child of 6 siblings today. Like her opportunity for learning didn't involve learning how to do laundry because that's something she's been doing since she was very young, right? And so I do think like I think when we are talking about learning loss and when we are talking about the needs of students of color and we are talking about safety and we are talking about COVID, we're talking about a lot of layered things. But what was clear to me last night was that there were some teachers on the call that were sharing from their experience, but it was not a shared experience that many of the students in our city are having, right now. And so I just, again, like, for me, I just think like safety is not a guarantee right now in our city, and safety has to have many different contexts, and it can't just be about class sizes, and it can't just be about, you know, this and this. There's a lot of contributors to safety that we need to be having, that could be a much bigger, more inclusive conversation that really um, includes the full experiences of the students of Minneapolis public schools.
100% agree. Well, with that, we will end our recap. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. And thank you all for listening.
Bye.